I'm in the wind now. I'm sure I'll be dead by tomorrow, but I need to let people know this thing is loose. I'm an agent with the United States government, and my station is Black Site number 7. I won't tell you my name. It wouldn't matter much anyway, but this was not how I saw my life going. I spent 6 years in Iraq, signed up right after high school. It was nothing like the recruiter told me it would be. I spent 8 hours in the blistering heat. I hauled my fair share of comrades out of firefights, and I saw a lot of crap out there that would make an ordinary person go crazier than I might be. I've had a camel spider crawl on me while I sleep. I watched friends I've known since basic get decapitated through binoculars, burned houses full of insurgents and civilians to rubble, and a lot of other things I really don't like to talk about. When I was done, they gave me my papers, thanked me for my service, and sent me home. I know I have no right to complain. Many guys didn't make it back, but home was worse. I'd spent 6 years in an active combat zone, and now I was just, supposed to come home and go back to civilian life? I spent 3 months in the civilian world. 2 of those months were spent in crappy apartments because my parents couldn't handle the night terrors and the jumpy Marine that their son had become. Every car horn, every barking dog, every firework rattling in the street had me reaching for my gun or breaking into a cold sweat when I couldn't find it. Before TJ found me, I was honestly considering killing myself. Then one day, he was just at my door with that big shit-eating grin he'd always worn in the desert. "You look like hell, Hoss. Let me get you some pancakes. I got something I want to discuss with you." TJ was my platoon leader in the sandbox. They called him the comedian because he was always smiling, always cracking jokes. He was a functional sociopath. I guess most of us were. I always admired his ability to laugh in the face of the messed up stuff we did. TJ's not his real name, clearly, but since he's still in this crap and I've left it behind, I figure the best I can do is not remind them that he's why I'm here. So he took me to breakfast. In the back of a crowded Denny's, he laid it all out for me. "You got it bad, Hoss, but that's okay, 'cause old Uncle TJ has the cure for you. Got a new job, familiar work that might interest you. Ever hear of Two Trees?" As it happened, I had. Two Trees was a government institute that, on the surface, did a lot of medical research and clinical trials. Underneath, though, they did wet work, and anyone who was involved in covert ops knew about Two Trees. We'd worked with them a few times in Iraq, and their guys were spooky, to say the least. "You're looking at the new head of Black Site number 7. I furrowed my brow at him. "Congrats. Should I know what that is?" "Of course not. It's a closely guarded government secret. Two Trees is paying me a small fortune to keep it that way. Problem is, I need someone to curate the site for me. Someone with military training, experience with firearms, and a need for some normalcy. Know anyone that might fit that bill, Hoss?" I knew what he was asking, but I didn't think I was the one he was looking for. I hadn't found work in 3 months since I'd been back, and most of that was because I couldn't settle into anything. I was constantly jumpy, constantly on edge, and that makes it hard to find work. No one wanted you doing security work or minding a gas station when every backfiring car was an enemy combatant. What would happen if I had an episode in a government facility of all places? I shook my head. "Thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm fit for duty the way I am." "Yeah, I thought you might say that." He pulled a metal tin out of his front pocket and slid it across the table. "Your medical file reads like a bench work for PTSD, night terrors, irritability, being on edge, those irrational bouts of anger that got you thrown out of your parents' house." I felt defensive. "How did you know about that?" "You'd be surprised what my level of clearance will get you. The therapist records were about as hard to get as a beer at a gas station. Well, I got a little present for you, Hoss. Welcome to the rest of your life," he said, tapping the outside of the silver case. The case was about as big as an Altoids tin. There were no markings on it, no filigrees or needless ornaments, and it had the distinctly surgical look that you usually see with military tech. I slid my hand towards it, but I didn't seem to want to touch it. Every sense I had told me to walk away right now, not to touch that thing, and just walk away from this unassuming little case. I forced my hands to pop it open instead. Inside was a pair of gray gel caps. "What are these?" "These are the answer to your prayers. 2 of these a day will make you feel as calm and clear as you did when you were a lad of 18. No more jumping at every noise. No more reaching for your gun when a dog barks or a car backfires. Just peace of mind." Looking back, that's probably what Mephistopheles said when he spoke to Faust. What's the catch? These pills are only available through the Two Trees Corporation. Employees who agree to be part of the clinical trials get them free of charge. But they're only available to employees, he said, with a little grin. Take them. Take a day to feel the effects, and let me know what you think. Call me tomorrow and give me your answer. Enjoy a night of freedom, then make your decision. I took the pills home with me, and after a few hours of staring at them, I took them with some vodka. The effects were sudden and immediate. If you've never had PTSD, then it's hard to explain, but it's like having a loose wire and someone suddenly fixes it. Then you go back to the way you used to be. My anxiety just melted away. My fear dissipated. My unease and dread were gone, and my anger seemed like a distant memory. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my depression and my anxiety, and suddenly, I felt like I had before I boarded that bus in 2003 and headed out to basic training. I was finally comfortable in my own head. It was like coming back to a safe place after years of running from danger. After the first good night's sleep I'd had since shipping out, I called TJ and told him I was in. One question, I asked. What's in the pills that makes them work so well? He was silent for a long minute, and then finally he said, You really don't want to know, Hoss. Pack your stuff. There will be a moving truck to take you to West Virginia in the morning. And that is how I came to work at Black Site number 7. I must have looked like a junkie by the time I pulled up in front of my new house. I didn't have much. The truck had taken all 4 boxes into the deep woods as I followed in my old compact. The journey took me about 16 hours, and by the time I got there, I was starting to feel the anxiety creep back in. I became angry at how slow the truck was going, afraid that this whole thing was a trick and they would kill me. By the time I arrived, I found myself wanting to die, hoping for death, so I could return to the quiet that had been in my head before. That was when I saw TJ standing at the gate of what looked like an old military checkpoint. He flashed that knowing smile and handed me another silver case. I dry swallowed the pills without a word and felt the inner peace worming its way back into my brain. Then he showed me to my new quarters. It was a little bunk room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a locker for my clothes. There was a foot locker for my personal stuff, and I was told to keep the place clean. I would be responsible for the site and its security. TJ showed me a terminal off the bedroom for monitoring and camera feeds. The compound had cameras all over the place, but I appeared to be the only person here full-time. The site's mostly for storage these days, but it's what we get up to here at night that may interest you. That's why you're here. I need someone I can trust to watch this site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4 times a year, you'll be relieved for a week of R&R somewhere. But other than that, this is your world, Hoss. That didn't bother me. I had no problem being alone after 3 months of people. What I was curious about was what I would be doing out here. What am I looking at exactly? TJ pointed at the 3 buildings on the camera. Truck comes twice a week. Let them through the gate and don't bother them. They'll take what they need from the building and won't bother you either. Keep nosy people out. Lethal force is authorized, and don't ever go in there, or I'll have to show you where Black Site 8 is, he said with a smile. The smile didn't make it to his eyes. Don't worry about being vigilant, though. If anything bigger than a mouse moves out there, the alarms will let you know about it right away. He told me that my food would be delivered once a week, mostly MREs, and I could order anything I wanted from the terminal in the living room. There was a workout yard near the second building, and I could move through the woods if I chose, as long as I took my phone with me so I could get alerts from the console. By the way, hand me your phone, he said. When I did, he put it in his pocket and handed me a new one. That's your new phone. I'll take the keys to your car, too, and put the money in your account. This is your life now, Hoss, so don't take this job lightly. If you leave the grounds, we'll know. If you try to update social media or try to tell anyone on the outside about what you've seen here, we'll know. If you want to get married or feel like you need out, arrangements can be made after your first 5-year tour. As far as anyone is concerned, you no longer exist. Don't be stupid. Put in your 5 years, and we'll reassess your position then. He grinned again and punched me in the arm. And lighten up. This'll be the easiest 5 years of your life. From that point on, I was an employee of Two Trees. TJ had been right. The first 5 years flew by. I lived on the site, spending my days working out or watching TV. I played the latest video games and watched the newest movies. Twice a week, as advertised, a truck rolled up and honked. I would check the cameras, open the gates, and they would do the rest. They would honk when they were ready to leave, and I left them alone. The trucks always had the Two Trees logo on them, and they never popped in to give me any crap, and I never went out to give them any. I never tried to get into the warehouses. I'd been a soldier long enough to know how to check my curiosity, and the scares were minimal. The food kept coming, the pills kept coming, and kept me in the right mind, too, and it was pretty peaceful, all told. The alarms, to my knowledge, only went off 3 times in that first year. 2 of those times, it was a deer who had wandered too close. The first time it happened, I had slunk out in a panic, service pistol in hand and boxer shorts flapping. As I rounded the first warehouse, I drew down on a very surprised doe who darted away before I could draw a bead on her. It was kind of a special moment for me. I had never seen a deer up close, and as it ran away, I was glad I hadn't shot it. The third time the alarm went off, it was a person, though. It was the first person I'd seen in 3 months. I'd been sitting at the console one night watching the latest Marvel Avengers movie. I think it might have been Infinity Wars, when the alarm went off. I paused the movie, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit on the monitor. My eyes went wide, though, when I realized it was a person. He had a crowbar. He was attempting to pry the door open. He must have come out of the woods, because if he had driven up, I would have known about it sooner. It had been 3 months since I'd seen another person. The last one had been Agent Daughtry, who'd come to relieve me for a week of R&R in September. The idea of seeing a person not connected with Two Trees made me feel weird. Even when you were on R&R, you went to a company resort or a company place full of company people. This stopped you from getting a little too drunk and talking about all the stuff you did for your country. It was a great idea, but it meant you had nearly no interaction with civilians. I took my pistol out and crept up on him in near silence. When my foot came down on an extra crunchy stick, he turned his head and noticed me. He raised the crowbar as if to attack, and the rest was instinct. The gun went off without me having even spoken to him, reflexes taking over and dropping the threat before it could become a real danger. His left eye popped like an overripe fruit, and he fell down on the hard December ground. I called TJ, and he and some of the other men in suits came to assess the damage. You did just right, Hoss. He was a threat to the facility and needed to be put down. Don't think for a minute that this reflects poorly on you. What will you do with him, I asked. TJ smiled. Immediate disposal, Hoss. Think you got the stomach to help us? I found that I did, and once he was doused in gasoline, we set him ablaze at the edge of the property. They gave me a week of R&R for that, and when I came back, TJ must have decided that I was worthy of being brought in on certain things. The alarm went off about a week after I'd come back from R&R, and I saw a black car rolling up the front gate. TJ stepped out of it and waved as it stopped in the concrete roundabout, other men getting out as well. I slid my shoulder holster on and went out to meet him. It was 11 p.m., and a visit this late was highly irregular. As I approached the vehicle, 2 guys in suits were bringing a man with a bag on his head out of the car. He was wearing scrubs, his hands bound behind his back, and I could hear him crying beneath the black hood he wore. I looked between them, waiting for an explanation, and TJ threw an arm around me and walked me towards the spot where we had burnt the trespasser. Hoss, I think it's time that we bring you in on the second reason for black sites. You see, sometimes Two Trees has assets that need to be eliminated. The black sites are often used for this purpose. It's always the responsibility of the site's caretaker to carry out the elimination. Fringe benefits, I suppose you could say. Why wasn't I told this before, I asked, feeling indignant. I'm no murderer. Oh, well, those combatants in Iraq will be glad to hear that, won't they? He said almost snidely. That was war, TJ. This is murder. Think of this as war too, Hoss. These people are enemies, and they need to be eliminated for the good of the public safety. It's part of the job, Hoss, a part I know firsthand that you're capable of. They put the man on his knees in the middle of the burn spot, and I could hear him praying under that hood as we stood around him. Put him down, Hoss. That's an order, TJ said. And if I won't, I said, looking at him icily. The 2 men on either side drew their guns, and TJ grinned. Then I'm afraid that these men will have to execute both of you. Come on, Hoss. Don't throw this away over some nobody. He's no different than the man outside the warehouse. Looking back, I kinda just wish I'd let them shoot me. But I guess if I had, you'd never know about any of this. Instead, I drew out my gun and put a bullet in his skull, glowering at TJ as his buddies put their guns away. You made the right choice, Hoss. Who knows? You might not have to do this more than a dozen times in the next 4 years. On that note, he was wrong. I executed an asset a month after that. They were mostly people in scrubs, people in lab coats, doctors, researchers, people who had likely tried to steal from whatever facility they worked at. They were men, women, Old men and scared 20-somethings. I never bothered to learn their names. They were just assets that needed to be eliminated. I became kind of numb to the process. We burned them afterwards. Gasoline and fire made it like they were never there. The spot near the edge had a charred look to it for a while after that. At the end of 5 years, TJ came to see me and asked if I wanted to re-up. What happens if I walk away? I asked. I was eating dinner when he came by, and he had sat down to have a plate of fettuccine with me. Given my free time, I had learned to do a good number of things that I couldn't before. I became a pretty good cook. I learned to play the guitar, read every book on the shelf I had bought to hold them, and there was a chainsaw out back along with some sculptures I had made with it. I couldn't say I hadn't enjoyed my time here, the killings aside, but I was curious to know if they'd actually let me leave. You'll be allowed to return to the real world, your bank account fuller and your retirement substantial. Just watch what you say out there. I'd hate to have to bring you back for your replacement to put a bullet in. I ended up signing up for another 4 years. I shouldn't have done that. I was 8 years deep when they brought the girl in the black bag to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had started to think about going to bed when the alarm went off. I saw the town car rolling up and looked for TJ. He was not the one that climbed out, however. This guy had his hair slicked back, his suit a perfect blue pinstripe. He didn't wave at me, and I felt a sense of dread as I grabbed my gun. Somehow I expected TJ to be under that bag this time. The man's name was Stein, and luckily he did not have TJ under that bag. What he did have was a kid with a thick black bag over their head. I couldn't tell at first if it was a boy or a girl. They were dressed in baggy clothes, Salvation Army rags that a homeless guy would be embarrassed to wear, and they were crying loudly under their hood. 2 familiar men had the kid, and they both looked stoic about the whole matter. Stein didn't say anything, just led the procession over to the charred spot and put the kid on their knees. When he didn't take the hood off, I did it myself. He winced, but he didn't stop me. This was my place, my job, and I had garnered a reputation for being a professional, a reputation I was about to ruin. The bag came off, and the little girl's tear-streaked face came into view in the harsh fluorescence. Her hair was cut short, dirty blonde, and her face was covered in bruises. Her nose looked broken, her lips split. The blood trickled down her face like red tears, and they mingled with her actual tears as they fell to the damp earth. I sighed, looking at Stein as the gun stayed at the ready. The hell is this? Stein looked surprised. It's an asset. TJ said you could handle these for us. Handle the asset. This is a kid, barely old enough to wipe her own ass. What could she have possibly done? Stein's face was stony. Yours is not to question, soldier. Liquidate this asset, or be liquidated. I looked at the kid, her whole face shaking as the tears and blood fell, and I thought about watching her head pop like a grape. This wasn't some scared adult, some stoic old man, some praying woman, or some cursing thing in a sallow skin. This was a kid. I had killed a lot of people, more in my time here than I ever had during war, but I was still a professional. Professionals had standards. No, I said. Stein blinked. What? No, I don't kill kids. Do it yourself. The 2 men drew their guns, and I was transported back in time. I was standing there, 2 days after Christmas, watching TJ grin and tell me the rules. Now I was standing in the woods, the autumn leaves carpeting the ground, feeling sure that it would soon drink both my blood and the girl's. I'll give you till the count of 3 to kill the girl. After that point, you will both be executed. 1. Their guns were unwavering, but so was my resolve. 2. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. 3. I heard a sound like wet concrete splitting open. It was followed by a high-pitched scream and a pair of bodies hitting the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Stein running towards the town car, his composure gone. The 2 men who'd been holding me at gunpoint were bleeding out on the ground from large, grisly neck wounds. As I watched Stein run, a rust-red something snapped out and caught him in the back of the neck, dropping him inches from the town car. The red thing protruded from the front of his neck, and he gasped futilely as he lay dying. I looked back in the direction of the thing that had snapped out and saw that the girl was now a mass of red spikes, segmented like spider legs. Her face had split down long ways, forcing her face into a grisly sideways maw. The area between the teeth glowed a deep red, and I could see the eyes on the girl's face blinking erratically. The 2 halves of her smile grinned at me, and the effect was a little dizzying. I figured for the second time that day that I was going to die, but she scuttled off into the woods instead, walking on her strange spidery appendages as she crashed through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes, not quite sure I believed I wasn't dead, and then I started running too. I crashed through the woods for hours, running in no particular direction, sure that at any minute the creature or a helicopter from 2 trees would fall on me and either rip me to pieces or just blow me away. I was blundering off with no wallet, no cell phone, just my gun and the clothes I'd been wearing. Was the phone how they tracked me? TJ hadn't said as much, but I kind of figured it was. When the ground went out from under me, I felt the air drop out of my lungs. I fell 5 feet off the muddy ledge and skinned my hands. My knees hurt where I had landed on them, and I realized pretty quick that I had fallen onto the road. If I thought it might be an illusion, the headlights that pinned me to the ground a moment later left me with little doubt. I was kind of numb to the idea of dying at this point, and I just lay there waiting to be run over. Thankfully, the truck stopped, and after a short conversation with the driver, he offered to take me into town. That's how I came to be here in this dingy hotel that just happens to have a computer in the lobby. I sold the gun for about $500 and figured I'd disappear as soon as I'm done writing this. They know I'm gone now, but I don't know if they think I'm dead or if they think I ran. Either way, they'll find me. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm more worried about the little girl that's loose in the woods, and whatever it is that's living beneath their skin. If you see a young girl with short, dirty blonde hair, do not approach her. I don't know if she killed those men to get away, or if she killed them because she wanted to, but she should be considered dangerous if you encounter her in the wild. And if a man from 2 trees offers you a job, do not become the new curator of Black Site 7. The job is definitely not at all what it appears to be. We recently moved into our new house. It's perfect, just the right size for our family, but it has a strange problem with the drains. I noticed it while I was unpacking the bathroom things. I turned to discover that my husband hadn't flushed and pushed the lever to send it down the drain. When I did, I discovered that the sinks burble whenever you flush the toilet. Nothing too jarring, but it scared me a little when I first heard it. The sink burbled and bubbled, making a noise deep in the drain as it cleared the water. My husband laughed it off when I mentioned it to him. "It's an old house, dear. The pipes are on the central line that feeds into the septic tank. No one has used them in a while, so it's probably just getting used to people being here again." I blew it off as a weird thing the house did and just went about my business. A week later, the drain started burbling when I took a shower, too. I overlooked it, though, not wanting to dwell on something I ultimately couldn't do anything about. This was the first place I'd lived with a septic tank. I'd always used city water, and I figured it was just something that happened when you used a septic tank. My husband barely seemed to notice it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary. After a few weeks, I had almost come to ignore it, until the whispering started. I was brushing my teeth one night, running the water as I always did, when I heard the burbling coming from the drain again. I had bent my mouth to the stream to get a mouthful of water, when I could have sworn I heard a burbling kind of whisper coming from the drain. It was barely audible, more like a gurgle than a burble, but as I listened, it almost sounded like words. Black bank bees. Back bank bees. I turned off the water, spitting my mouth full of paste down the drain, and closed the door behind me. The burbling got worse from there on out. It didn't just bubble when the water was on. It always bubbled, loud and jarring, and I was still certain I could hear some kind of whispering. My husband just shrugged it off as normal. He was busy with work and didn't have time to indulge his flighty wife. I put up with it as best I could, but it was honestly starting to grate on my nerves a bit. I heard it in the kitchen, the living room, and especially whenever I had to go to the bathroom. The bathroom seemed to be the epicenter, and as the days progressed, I became more and more confident I could hear words amidst the gurgles. I lost my cool one night when my husband was working late. As I lay in bed, my son sleeping soundly next to me, I could hear the sink burbling and whispering from the hall bathroom. The bubbles were visible now when it burbled, deep green bubbles that sloshed up the drain and filled the sink with a stagnant water smell. Never when my husband was at home, of course, and the bastard didn't believe me when I showed him the thin film that hung on the bowl. As I lay there listening, the gurgling seemed to mock me. It seemed like only I could hear it, and the continued surge of tidal force had frazzled me. I was up before I knew what I was doing. I stomped down the hall in my pajamas, heading for the bathroom on bare feet. I was mad. I'd had enough of it, and I slammed the door open as I saw the towel rack shake ominously. I flipped on the lights like I was intending to catch the sink doing something wrong, and shouted loud enough to make my son stir and cry in his sleep. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" I screamed at the burbling sink. And, for a wonder, it did. The drain stopped burbling for a few seconds, and there was peace. Then a geyser erupted from the drain and splashed high enough to splatter the ceiling in a green fountain. It splattered the walls, pattered against the shower curtain, and caused the ceiling to rain drops of thick sludge. I'd fallen to my backside in the hallway, watching the geyser with wide eyes, when I saw something gloop out of the drain that made me scream. I scuttled across the floor, my back hitting the bedroom door, hearing my son cry out from the bedroom. I had seen the last thing I would have expected from the narrow bathroom drain, and I was certain now that I could hear something else joining it as it gurgled onto the bathroom floor. A hand of sludgy, green liquid that had pushed its way up the drain like an angry hurricane. I reached with numb fingers for the knob, the fingers refusing to find purchase as I slapped at it uneasily. I heard a gurgling thunk then, the sound of water trying to maintain a shape it was unaccustomed to, and something cast a shadow against the door. The best way I can describe it is the shadow appeared to be cast by a living jello mold. It was solid, but not transparent. It cast a watery shadow, its form undulating as it came towards the door. A single green watery hand gripped the door frame. I screamed as it lumbered into the hallway, and my grasping hand felt like a dead fish. It was 6 feet tall, bulbous and amorphous, with a shuddering bald head. Its eyes were murky green coals, and its form was a wiggling mass of barely contained fluid. The fluid was, well, it was awful. It had clearly drawn its matter from the septic tank, and the things floating within the water didn't bear thinking about. It took a single unsure step, the unstable golem shaking as it took another tottering step forward. My son was screaming now, unsure where I was, and his terror only amplified my fear. As it wobbled towards me, leaving puddles of oozing liquid on the floor, I heard the burbling voice again as it whisper wailed its words. "Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees." I tried again to open the door, my eyes locked in terror on this watery monstrosity. "Beck, bank, bees! Beck, bank, bees!" I felt my own water puddle on the floor as my bladder let go, the creature towering over me. "Beck, bank, bees!" it yelled. It leaned over me, and I could feel the stagnant drops fall onto my face. I wanted to cover my nose. It smelled like raw sewage, but I was too afraid to move. I was sure in that moment that I would never see my husband or my son again. He would return home to find me dead, maybe find our son dead too in his bed. He would see the water and always wonder what had happened to me. As this creature crouched over me, I was certain that the last thing I saw would be his terrible sewage form. It bent its watery lips to my face then, and when it whispered this time, I could hear something different. "Check. Tank. Please." The words were spoken as though they might break the creature, and they were spoken with the utmost emphasis. His speech was slushy, slurry, as though his tongue was missing. He was approximating speech, but it was still difficult to make out. I looked into those green orbs and repeated back what he had said. "Check. Tank. Please?" It nodded its liquid head, its featureless face almost looking relieved. Then it melted into a deluge of stagnant water, and I was covered in buckets of disgusting sewage. My husband didn't believe me. I was still cleaning up sewage when he came home, and he was utterly flabbergasted. I told him about the creature, about its final message, but he refused to believe it. It was a dream, he said. The septic tank had backflowed into the house, and I had dreamed this watery creature. We went back and forth for hours, until finally I had the solution. "Open up the septic tank, then. If there's nothing there, then I'll never say another word about it. I'll deal with the gurgles and the bubbles, and I'll never say another word about anything." After another hour of arguing, he finally relented. We called a service, and they breached the lid. It wasn't too hard. The earth was removed, and the lid was removed with a little backhoe. The smell was atrocious, but the men didn't seem to mind. My husband told them that we had a problem with the tank. It flowed into the house, and they figured the valve had been stuck. I saw the pumper hose descend, and the tank was emptied. My husband said I didn't need to be there for this, but I wanted to see. As the sewage went down, I saw the operator's eyes grow large. He called his partner over, and a flashlight was found. The flashlight nearly fell into the tank when it fell across the sewage-covered lump. His partner told us that it appeared to be something in the tank, but we shouldn't worry. The house has been empty for a while. It's probably just a congealed mass or something. The operator continued to pump the tank, and as the water level fell, we saw that the lump was more than a congealed mass of waste. It was a body. The police were called. Our front yard was soon playing host to 3 squad cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance. The techs were shunted aside as the rescue team received the body from the septic tank and loaded the remains into a body bag for identification. The police asked us some questions, but had already cleared us for the most part, since the body appeared to have been there for months. The inspector had likely not breached the tank at all during the initial inspection, so the body could have been there for years if it had been sealed properly. As the bag was zipped, I got a momentary glance at him. It was large, the head bald and lumpy. It looked a little like the sewage form that had tottered over me in the hallway. Before they zipped it up, the desiccated creature's mouth lolled open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His tongue was mangled. Since the incident, we've heard no more burbling. The septic tank hasn't sputtered, and the house has been quiet since that night. Other than the sounds of our family, of course. My husband still can't explain how I knew there was a body in the tank, but I'm just glad that there was ultimately a happy ending to the story. So next time you hear a burbling in your pipes, don't discount it as simple plumbing issues. Your house may be hearing burbles from beyond. Detective Lance pulled up in front of the farmhouse, marveling at the way the corn rattled in the fields. The corn was wrong, he could tell that right away, and Lance could honestly say that he had never seen corn look that way. The husks were brown, the corn inside turning black as it rotted on the stalk. He had been impressed by the amount of corn surrounding the farmhouse, acres of skeletal stalks that made the farmhouse feel like an island in a dead corn sea. The police cars out front looked out of place in the dirt yard, and as he mounted the stairs, one of the rural cops came out to meet him. Lance was on loan from the nearby precinct, and the clock was ticking. He had about 36 hours to find anything that would lead them to 5 missing people. They needed his help in discovering what might have happened to the Murphy clan. "Bring me up to speed," he said, nodding at the man as he came onto the porch. He looked like any other state trooper, his coat trimmed in fur, his hat leaning into something more cowboy than law enforcement. He tugged a pack of smokes out of his pocket and lit one, the smoke curling up against the rafters of the porch as he assessed the big city detective they had called to help. Whatever he saw, he seemed unimpressed, and his smile was more than a little mocking. "Well, well, by all means, sir, let me fill you in on what us bumpkins have managed to turn up." He flipped open a spiral notebook and started flipping through the crumpled pages. Lance didn't much care for his tone, but he held his tongue as the trooper flipped through the notes. The county Mounties had been working the case for about a week, and had no idea what had become of the small farm family. The report said that the Murphys, 2 adults and 3 children, had suddenly vanished from their large farm. They'd also disappeared right around harvest time, leaving their cash crop in the ground. This made their sudden vanishing act all the more confusing, and Lance was eager to get his teeth in this one. Let's see. On October 23rd, their closest neighbor noticed the crops in the field had changed. They said it appeared that frost had killed all their corn overnight and just left it to rot. This was at odds since it had never gotten below 50 degrees on any given night recently. They came to check on the family and noticed that they were gone. Last time anyone could remember seeing them was on the 12th when they came into town to buy pumpkins for the kids. The children were out of school for the harvest, and they were getting ready to bring in the corn when they suddenly vanished. That's all we know, and that's why we called you in. I think the sheriff hopes a fresh set of eyes will prove useful. Have you found anything inside? No blood or bodies, if that's what you mean. We've found nothing to make us consider foul play, and no signs of robbery either. There's no reason at all that they should have left their house, and their vehicles are still there too. So, unless they walked out on foot with a kid under 3 and 2 under 18, We have to assume that they were abducted for some reason." Lance nodded, thinking over what they knew and adding it to the small amount that he assumed. With kids present, there was a pretty good chance that it had been a kidnapping. This was the Midwest, and it wasn't uncommon to have a whole family get picked up by traffickers, or worse. The location of the farm would mean that it would make it easy for them to disappear without notice. All the corn would mean that their crime scene would go unnoticed, even if they tried to run. They would likely never find the Murphys, not alive anyway, but Lance had to try. He was one of the department's best detectives, and he had a lot to live up to. "Show me the house. Let's see what I can find." "Alright, but we've pretty much gone over this whole place with a fine-tooth comb. I'm not sure there's much else to find." After an hour and a half of searching the scene, Lance feared he might have been right. The farmhouse had 3 rooms. One was clearly a bedroom. The other one was a big room for the kids. The third was a big open room containing a kitchen, a living room, and a sitting room. The home was pristine, recently clean and freshly swept, and everything looked far too orderly for a kidnapping scene. The dishes were done. There were clothes laid out for the next day. There was no sign of a struggle or a fight, and Lance couldn't figure out how they had been taken so neatly. He was searching the kids' room, looking for anything, when he came across the journal. It was nothing, just a salt and pepper mead notebook left on the floor as if it were a tent for natives. It was the most out-of-place thing in the house, and it stood out to Lance for some reason. He couldn't have said why, but his eyes tracked back to that book no matter where he was in the room. As he left, he scooped it up and took it with him as he went back to the living room. Lance opened to the page it had been left on as he walked up the hall, reading what appeared to be an entry for October 10th. "Daddy's mad. Someone keeps stealing our scarecrows. They just disappear out of the field, and Daddy's getting pretty upset about it. He's certain that Dale is stealing them, but Dale swears it isn't him. Scarecrows are pretty heavy, so I'm not sure how he could steal them by himself. The field looks so empty without them. It's just corn as far as the eye can see. Sometimes I stand on the porch and just watch it wave in the breeze, hearing it rustle as the stalks chuckle together. It used to be comforting, but it's a little creepy lately. The rustling makes me think of a monster moving in the corn, and I've spent less time in the corn by myself. Hopefully, whoever's stealing our scarecrows will get caught. That way Daddy won't be so mad all the time." It was signed, Register Murphy. Register Murphy had been the middle child, Lance remembered, as he flipped to the next page. He was supposed to be about 8, and by his writing, Lance could believe it. It read like a typical child's journal, but Lance found himself intrigued all the same. If the kid had seen something, maybe he'd written about it in the journal. Something like that could help him narrow down the culprit or even a motive. Lance furrowed his brow and turned to the next page. There was indeed a visitor, but it wasn't the one that Lance had expected. October 11th. There was a surprise in the field this morning. Daddy was standing on the porch this morning when we came out to work, and he was scratching his head as he looked into the east field. Standing on a brand new post, its body turning rapidly, was a brand new scarecrow. It was dressed in a dark blue suit, a tall top hat on its round head, and the head was a small orange pumpkin. I thought maybe he was turning in the breeze, but then I realized that there wasn't any wind. The corn was still, and the usual rattle was gone. The scarecrow just kind of moved on its own. It danced something smooth and graceful. His arms were boneless, his legs kicking freely, and as the post wiggled around, he continued to dance and sway. I thought Daddy would be mad, but he seemed pretty happy about the scarecrow. He thinks it's funny, a dancing scarecrow, and he says it'll bring luck to our crops. His mother told him a story about a dancing scarecrow that brought rain and grew the corn 30 feet high. As he told it to us, I could see that it meant a lot to him, and he thought it was a big honor to have a dancing scarecrow in one of our fields. We were farming in the field he was in that day, and I couldn't help but watch him as he danced and swayed. Daddy seemed real happy, smiling every time he looked at the thing, but I was a little creeped out by it. I was working close to it, and I couldn't help but notice when it turned its head to look at me. The greasy face was far too lifelike, and it seemed to linger on me every time it got close. We brought in the corn, but I dreamed about that dancing scarecrow last night. It was dancing right in front of me, its mouth screaming as it twisted. Its dance became more and more violent, straw flying as it flailed around. Its screams started sounding like laughter, and as it fixed its eyes on me, it started to whisper, "He comes! He comes! He comes!" Who is this person he's talking about? What'll happen when he comes? Register Murphy. A dancing scarecrow? What the hell was that? Lance wondered. Had the kidnappers been dressed as scarecrows or something? There was no way that one person had kidnapped 5 people and spirited them away with no one noticing. Lance turned the page and read the next entry, seeing a pattern as the young boy laid out the days before his disappearance. The more he read, the less childish it sounded. The longer he read, the more it sounded like Register Murphy was detailing the worst days of his life. October 12th. There are 2 of them now. The new one is dressed in a yellow suit with a matching hat, and despite looking brand new, it looks like it was colored with pee-pee. They stand side by side in the fields, kicking their legs and swinging their arms, looking like they're trapped in a windstorm. Daddy clapped when he saw them, saying that this was exactly what he wanted. The story said that more scarecrows would show up, and I almost shook when he said it. More scarecrows? How many more? There were 2 kicking and dancing, smiling their greasy grins as they wiggled around. I was working alone in the east field today, picking the fields as far from the scarecrows as I could, when I heard them whispering. They were talking, just like they had in my dream, whispering about coming or whoever he was. I heard the corn rustle as it came over in the row next to me, and suddenly there they were, both of them dancing, spinning in the air like typhoons, and I could hear them whispering and screaming all around me. I covered my ears as they swirled, and when Dale found me crying, they were both gone. As I lay in bed that night, I heard them rustling amongst the corn plants, their bodies lashing wildly against the corn stalks, and the sound they made my skin crawl. October 13th. Daddy's gotten weird. When I came out to work today, he was talking to the scarecrows. There are 3 of them now, one of them in a blue suit, one in a yellow suit, and the newest one in a gray suit with a matching top hat. They were all side by side in the east field, dancing and swaying as they held Daddy with their black eyes. They seemed to be gently swaying, not the usual violent dancing they do, and they almost seemed to be listening to him. Listening or talking. He didn't help us today. We all went to work in the fields, picking corn and packing produce, but Daddy stayed with the scarecrows. He looked strange out in the field in his sleeveless t-shirt and his sleep pants, and when Mama went to go talk to him, he told her to go back inside. We were all on the porch carving pumpkins when she came back. Even Thomas was hacking away at his pumpkin's face with a butter knife, and Mama looked scared. She said that Daddy just wasn't feeling well, and when all the pumpkins were lit, he was still standing out there in the dark, talking with those scarecrows. I heard them out there dancing again last night, but I never heard Daddy come back inside. Register Murphy. Lance flipped back and read the last bit again. His dad, Marcus Murphy, was acting strangely. That could explain why his family had suddenly just up and disappeared. Maybe whoever these scarecrows were, they had help from the father. It was too soon to tell, but it was a working theory. That would explain why the vehicles that the family owned were still here. If the people running those scarecrows had their own vehicles, they could have disappeared easily without a trace. He kept reading, wanting more information, hoping for some other clue as to what had happened. October 14th. Daddy was still in the field, and so was a new scarecrow. He was in a green suit, and it looked like it was woven out of grass. All their heads are pumpkins, but unlike ours, they don't look squashy or attract flies. They just sit up there and smile and stare and look real creepy. Mama's worried about Daddy. All she does is sit at the window and watch him while he's in the field. He just stays in the field for some reason, listening to the scarecrows and talking with them. He moved around the cornfield sometimes, not picking or boxing, but just walking around aimlessly. Dale and I have been doing most of the work, but sometimes I can see the scarecrows following me. I felt like they might get me when it was just the 2 of them, but now there are 4, and it feels like they might trap me out there. They grin at me from out of the corn, watching me work, and when I try to tell Dale about it, he just tells me to stop being a spaz. Last night they were all over the field, and I had to put my head under the pillow to stop from hearing them. They sound scary, and their whispers are even louder now. They say he's coming, and that he's gonna get us. I don't know who he is, but I don't want him to get me. If he's as scary as the scarecrows are, I don't want him anywhere near the house. October 15th. Daddy's gone, but there's a new scarecrow out there now. This one's dressed in orange, and it matches the pumpkin he wears as a head. Mama told us to stay inside and went to go look for Daddy in the field. She couldn't find him out there and told us all to stay inside today. It started to drizzle a little, and while Thomas watched TV and Dale read, I sat by the window and watched the scarecrows. There are 5 of them now, and each of them are dancing just like the others. The rain doesn't hurt their spirits at all. They sit out in the rain and dance and sway on their posts, rustling the corn and sending streams of water flying off when they crash against them. It's weird, I wouldn't swear to it, but they look closer to the house somehow. Like when Daddy stood out there talking to them, they seemed farther from the house. Now I can see the rain as it slides off their faces. They're not on the porch, but it feels like they're close enough to throw a rock through the window if they wanted to. Thomas doesn't like them much. He came to sit with me and he said they were scary. He says they came and looked in his window at night, and he always hides and cries until they go away. I never checked to see if they came to my window. Maybe tonight I'll stay up a little and wait to see. This was looking more and more like a case of psychosis. The father had a break from reality and had done something to his family. Whatever this dancing scarecrow nonsense was didn't matter. It was pretty clear that something was going on with Marcus Murphy. Something tickled at the back of his mind as he read, though, and Lance couldn't help but think about something a friend had been telling him about. The scarecrows, the constant use of he, reminded him of Stephen's case. He shook it off, though, not wanting to muddy the waters with a different case. He called over one of the officers and asked if they could see if the family vehicles were all accounted for. He wanted them to check into places on the property where bodies could be hidden, like a well or an old drainage line or something. He suspected that the bodies had been easy for Marcus to move after they were dead, and wanted to know if there was anywhere on the property that they had found blood. "Nowhere, sir. There's not even a slaughterhouse. Marcus grew corn for the ethanol plant. Corn's pretty much his only crop. A lot of farmers out here grow mostly corn, and Marcus used every acre he had for his corn crop." Lance nodded. "What about a basement? Somewhere he might have taken them to kill them?" "No basement. Barn's clean. House is clean. The men are searching the field for anything that might be suspicious." Lance let the officer get back to it, noticing the deputy he had talked to when he came in, eyeballing him as he spoke with a large man in mirrored sunglasses. He returned to reading, seeing the possible sheriff nodding his head in his direction. They likely wanted to know what he knew, but he wasn't ready to tell them just yet. He didn't have a full picture, but he suspected it might be fuller than theirs. October 16th. Someone smashed our pumpkins last night. I can see them on the porch through the windows. Their guts have been scattered all over the porch, and their shells are lying across the yard. Daddy's still missing, and Mama won't let us leave the house. We found her on the porch this morning, and when Dale helped her inside, she sounded like something had scared her half to death. Dale didn't want Thomas and I to hear, but Mama said we needed to hear about it nonetheless. As she drank the coffee that Dale had made for her, she told us about how Daddy had called her out to the field, but it hadn't been Daddy. She had been woken up by the sound of him calling her name through the window. She'd seen someone standing there, their silhouette tall and broad like his had been. He had called her by name, and then moved towards the field as she went out in her nightshirt. The fields had been dark, the corn lit only by the silvery moon overhead, and Mama had followed the sound of crunchy husks underfoot. She could see him as she walked, and had hurried to catch up with him, but then the corn on either side had started rustling. Something was to her left, her right, behind her, and Mama felt hemmed in. She stopped following Daddy, and that was likely all that had saved her life. It seemed he had been hiding the sickle somewhere out of sight, and when he turned to slash her, she was farther back than he thought. Mama ran, bumping into one of the scarecrows as she careened into the field. Daddy was hot on her heels, and she ran blindly as she tried to lose him. The scarecrows popped up randomly as the rows of corn swung by on ghostly rails. Her legs burned and her face was wind-burnt as the stalks battered against her. She ran for her life, running on pure adrenaline. She didn't know how long she had run. She didn't know how far, and as the sun peeked up over the horizon, she collapsed on the porch in a heap as she prepared to be killed. When she opened her eyes again, it was morning, and Dale was helping her inside. There are 6 scarecrows now, and the newest one has a white suit and hat. They're all out there dancing now, swirling in the rain and rustling the corn plants. I think I can see Daddy out there if I look closely. He's still carrying the sickle, and there's something over his head, though I can't tell what it is. I'm scared. I don't understand what's going on, but I know we won't be going back into the field anytime soon. October 17th. Daddy is stalking the house from the fields. The new scarecrow, number 7, has a light pink suit. Most people would say it's supposed to be cute, but not me. It looks like old blood. Mama's standing at the window, watching Daddy as he peeks at us from the corn. His head is covered by a pumpkin now too, but it's not the same as the scarecrow's. His head is already starting to wilt, the pumpkin looking sad as he looks out through the eye holes. Thomas is crying, and Dale looks mad. He keeps pacing around, holding the old hatchet he used when we went camping. He keeps snarling out at Daddy like he's going to do something, and Mama seems worried that he will. It's getting dark now. I hope we make it till tomorrow. If you know something, Detective, it would be best if you shared it. Lance looked up from his notebook and into the reflective lenses of the sheriff. He was immensely fat, his belly pressed against his duty belt as he loomed over Detective Lance. He was grinning, but it was clear that his intentions were less than friendly. He was used to cowing his inferiors into doing what he wanted, but he might have overestimated his pull this time. Lance was not the sort to be cowed so easily. If I should learn anything that I think you need to know, Sheriff Leebrook, I'll be sure to let you know. Leebrook grinned, and Lance could see every one of his tobacco-stained teeth. That ain't quite how things work around here, hoss. We called you in on this one. That means I'm here to help you. That doesn't mean I work for you. Now, if you want me to be efficient at my job, let me work. Leebrook put his hands up and backed away, still smiling, but clearly not liking being rebuffed. Sure, you're the big-time detective after all. Lance looked back to the journal and continued reading, the cops now giving him a wide berth as they moved around him. October 18th. Dale left. He and Mama argued about it for hours, the two of them shouting in the back like they thought Thomas and I couldn't hear. Thomas has been crying in the living room, but Mama never came back out. Dale disappeared into the corn, the 8th scarecrow seeming to turn to the side to admit him. This one's wearing a black suit, making him look like a reaper. When he turned back to look at the house, I could clearly see the scowl that was sketched into his face, making it look different from the rest. It's dark now. I can see my breath as it steams out of my mouth. Thomas is shivering, and Mama still hasn't come out of the back room. I can see the ice swirling on the glass. The corn outside is rattling differently tonight. I can hear the ice breaking off as it hits the ground. The scarecrows are very close now. I can see them in the dark, the moon casting their shadows across our home. The shadows slide greasily into the farmhouse, and I moved Thomas away from them and put him to bed on the couch instead. We're both wrapped in one of Mama's old Afghans, but it's so cold. It's almost hard to write. My fingers are so numb, and I don't think I'll be able to write much longer. Someone's coming out of the corn, someone on a horse. Daddy's with him, Dale too, and he's wearing armor like a knight. He has deer antlers on his head, and there's an axe over his shoulder. I can see his eyes. They're red like coals, and they're burning under his helmet. The closer he gets, the more frozen the windows get. I can't see anything now. It's too icy, but I can hear the clip-clop of his horse's hooves. I know I should be scared, but the cold is sinking in, and I'm getting tired. Thomas has stopped shivering, and I think I'm going to close my eyes for a few minutes. Lance felt his breath hitch as he read the last entry. The handwriting here was cramped, almost illegible, the scribbles of a child who was learning to write. He stood up suddenly, taking the notebook with him as he went for the door. The big-bellied sheriff tried to step in his path, but Lance sidestepped him, never stopping. The sheriff cawed angrily behind him, but Lance was out the door and across the dooryard before anyone could stop him. They would never find the family, no more than they would find any of the others who had disappeared under similar circumstances. As he drove away, he was already on the phone with the only person who might be able to use this information. "Steve, it's Lance. I've got something you need to see. I think I might have more information about your Green Man. I've been searching for this tape most of my life. I've thought about nothing else since it was taken from me 12 years ago. As I sit in my grandmother's bedroom, holding the familiar red plastic in my hands, I feel a sense of inner peace. I know that my search is over, and that serenity can follow. Mr. Harzo's Corner was a show that I watched religiously from the age of 4 to 6. It wasn't some mysterious TV show that I saw on basic cable. It wasn't some scrambled signal I got from a weird public access network. It was actually something I found at a church rummage sale. The box of VHS tapes was sitting on a little table with the words 5 for $1 scrolled across it in permanent marker. I had leafed through it and seen the usual church swap meet stuff. Winnie the Pooh, VeggieTales, all the Disney movies with their cracked plastic windows and dirty fingerprints on the names. But nothing really stood out. I had selected a few Winnie the Pooh episodes when I found the dirty plastic cassette near the bottom. It had a lurid red body, the color similar to old lipstick, and a handwritten name on the front. The black magic marker name read Mr. Harzo's Corner, and it immediately caught my attention for some reason. I picked it up and just looked at it for a moment. I had grown up in an age of strange cassette tapes. Nickelodeon put out the chunky orange cassette tapes that often had episodes of Rugrats or Wild Thornberrys. And even some of the VeggieTales cassettes were different colors, depending on whether they were holiday specials or not. This one, however, seemed odd right off the bat. The plastic just felt thick in my fingers, and I remember both wanting to put it down and never put it down again. Finally, after 10 minutes of just looking at it, I did put it down, and I grabbed 2 cassettes featuring episodes of Barbie's Dream House, a Nickelodeon cassette featuring the Rugrats, and 2 with handwritten names saying they were old Winnie the Pooh cartoon episodes. I brought them to my mom, and after looking over them, she nodded and gave me $1. I had taken them to Miss Wazowski, the cheery old lady who often organizes these rummage sales, and she put them in a plastic grocery bag and smiled at me as I walked to rejoin my mom. It wasn't until I got home that I realized there was a 6th tape in that bag, though. I had just turned on the VCR TV combo in my room when I realized there was an unfamiliar, yet very familiar red cassette tape at the bottom of the bag that had definitely not been there when I'd checked out. I picked it up and saw that Mr. Harzo's Corner was scrawled across the front, and it was weird that I didn't remember picking it up at all. Instead of putting it back, I put it in the VCR and watched as the static began to clear on the screen. I had been intending to watch some of the Winnie the Pooh episodes, but the bag of tapes would sit forgotten for quite some time. Mr. Harzo's Corner would be the only thing I really cared about for the foreseeable future. The show appeared to be nothing special. It was clearly a Mr. Rogers knockoff, but the Mr. Harzo character was strange, yet endearing. He looked normal enough, a slight blonde guy, taller than your average kids show host, with a corduroy jacket and a pair of battered jeans that covered the tops of his Reebok sneakers. The camera showed him coming into a normal living room, again very reminiscent of Mr. Rogers, and then greeting everyone with a big smile and a waving hand. "Good afternoon, boys and girls, and of course, a very special afternoon to children of all ages. Welcome to Mr. Harzo's Corner. Know that I am glad to see you, and that I am always here, just for you." As it went on, Mr. Harzo's Corner turned out to be nothing like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers often taught children life lessons about accepting people and being a friend, and lessons about how the world worked. Mr. Harzo's Corner was more like having your own personal therapist inside your TV. Mr. Harzo taught no life lessons. He went on no adventures in make-believe. He just sat in his big easy chair with a cup of tea at his elbow and listened. First time I watched the episode, I was a little bit confused. After his greeting, he just leaned back and looked at me, smiling in a very strange way. His smile was warm, inviting even, but he seemed to be waiting for someone on the other end of the camera to begin talking. He just sat there staring at me, and I began to become a little creeped out. Even at 4, I knew it was a little bit unusual for adults to just sit there and stare at you. I remember reaching out to hit stop on the tape when suddenly Mr. Harzo cocked his head
and seemed to speak directly to me. "Leaving so soon? I understand. Well, I'm glad you came to see me today. I hope you'll come again very soon." My fingers stopped over the button. Was he talking to me? It seemed like he had been, but this was just a VHS tape. This was an age before interactive tapes, and the idea that the VHS could talk to you was a little eerie, but also a little bit interesting. When he had spoken directly to me, I remembered feeling a little sad that I was leaving already. He seemed like he understood, but maybe he was a little sad to see me go as well. I recalled my hand, and that big grin spread across his face again. "Changed your mind? I'm so glad. So why don't you tell me about your day? I'm sure I'd love to hear all about it." I sat for a moment, thinking about what to do. Finally, I told the smiling stranger on the tape about my day. I told him about my mother, and going to the rummage sale, about finding his cassette tape, about bringing all the cassette tapes home, and discovering that his cassette tape was in with the ones I had bought. I told him I hoped I wouldn't get in trouble for having 6 instead of 5 cassette tapes, because my mother would think I had stolen it and she would get mad. Through it all, Mr. Harzo just sat and nodded, smiling his smile and listening as if I had the most interesting things in the world to talk about. Even at 4, though, I began to think that this was just someone pretending to listen. I remember thinking back to shows like Dora the Explorer, where Dora would ask a question and then pretend to listen to your answer. No matter what you told her to do, whether it was to go towards the next thing she had to do or sit in the grass and look at the clouds, she always came up with the right answer and went off to do what she was supposed to. I assumed that Mr. Harzo would do the same. He would interrupt me any minute now, just like Dora did if you spoke for too long, and start on some pre-scripted bit of dialogue. But he didn't. He sat and listened politely until I was done speaking. Then he nodded and answered me as if we were two people having a normal conversation. "It sounds as though it's been an exciting day for you. I'm glad you got to go and do something important, something that you enjoy. It's a real honor to be part of your life, and I hope we can be friends for many years to come." I spent the rest of the day in my room, talking with Mr. Harzo and telling him about my family, my home, and my life. He always seemed interested in my stories, and he always listened with that big smile and that fatherly way of talking about everything. My mom called me for dinner, and he said he would wait for me to come back. When I returned, he was still sitting and looking at the screen like I had never left. He asked me about dinner, and we talked until it was time for me to go to bed. "Will I see you tomorrow?" he asked, and I assured him that he would. I nearly left the TV on and just went to bed, but something told me that might be a bad idea. Not because the tape was cursed or haunted, but because Mom might come in and find it on. She might talk to Mr. Harzo, and Mr. Harzo might decide to be her friend instead of mine. The thought of losing Mr. Harzo, even after such a short time, made me feel furious, and I turned off the tape and went grudgingly to bed. I spent the next 5 months with my nose pressed against the TV screen, and Mr. Harzo listening to all my problems and woes. When my mom grounded me after the dog knocked the lamp over, he listened and consoled me. When my dad accidentally bumped me and I fell down the last 3 stairs, he was the one who told me it would all be okay. Every childhood problem, every unforeseen event, Mr. Harzo was there for me. It wasn't just that he listened. It wasn't even his advice that made me love him so. When Mr. Harzo talked to you, you felt like you were the most important person in the world. His attention was the most important thing you could ever have, and my 4-year-old brain drank that attention in. I became hesitant to leave the house, making up excuses why Mom couldn't go places, since I'd have to come with her. I wanted to spend every waking moment with my new friend, but something on the horizon would leave me with even less time with my dear Mr. Harzo. When I had to start kindergarten, Mr. Harzo told me how it would be new and exciting, and how he wanted to hear all about it when I got home. I attended kindergarten for about a week, coming straight home to lay on the floor of my room and talk with my new friend. When Mom got a new job. She had landed a job as a tech support supervisor for a new company, which meant she couldn't take me after school anymore. Dad worked in a prison, so he was almost always at work. It began to look like I might have to go into after-school care. I was understandably upset about this, because it would limit the already slim time I had to chat with Mr. Harzo. Fortunately, there was an alternative. My grandmother agreed to take me after school. My grandmother lived alone, my grandfather having died before I was born, and I think she was excited about watching me. Grandma had been very sad since my grandfather's passing, and it had turned her into a quiet shell of her former self. My mom always talked about what an outspoken and vivacious woman my grandmother had been when she was younger, and now it seemed like I might get to meet this new grandma. As bad as it sounds, I wasn't really all that interested in any of it though. I simply wanted a place with a VHS player so I could watch my tape. At first, that was all we did too. Grandma would pick me up from school, asking how my day had been, and asking what I might like to do once we got home, and I would tell her that I wanted to watch my tapes in the den. She would offer to bake cookies with me or maybe take me to the park, but I was fully invested in the silky voice of Mr. Harzo. I would come in and lay my book bag down and go sit in the den for hours as I talked quietly to my good friend about everything and anything. He smiled when I told him about my grandma and said it was nice that I was keeping her company. Grandmothers are such a valuable resource of knowledge, and the fact that you have such a good relationship with yours is truly special. I agreed, but I was still very guarded about the tape. I would often turn it off when Grandma brought me snacks or asked if I was interested in going outside. I didn't want her to see Mr. Harzo, and I think I was still afraid that she would take him away from me if she saw him. She would want him to be her friend, and then I would be unable to see him since he would want to spend all his time with her. Mr. Harzo never said as much. All of his advice was placidly given through the TV after he had sat and listened to me. But I knew that if I coveted this tape, then others might as well. Over time, Grandma did manage to coax me out of the den. I was 5 after all, and the smell of cookies or the promise of ice cream had a talismanic effect on me still. Mr. Harzo became an after-dinner friend, a rainy day friend, but I still found myself wanting to spend as much time with him as I could. No matter what I was doing, playing on the swings or sitting in class or making cookies with Grandma or even sleeping in my bed, it seemed that I was thinking about Mr. Harzo. I would find myself hungry for any time I could get with him, and there were nights that I quietly whispered to him from the floor of my room as my parents slept not too far away. It didn't come to a head until I got careless at Grandma's house one day. It had been the best day my 6-year-old brain could remember. Grandma had taken me to the local carnival, more of a street fair than a regular fair, and I had done it all. I had ridden ponies, I had eaten so much I thought I would bust, I had seen clowns and jugglers and listened to bands, and for a moment I'd even stopped feeling the tug of Mr. Harzo. We came home and I ate dinner, and Grandma asked me if I wanted some TV time before my mom came to pick me up. I said I did, and I rushed off to tell Mr. Harzo about all the exciting things I had done and seen, and he laughed and told me how much fun it all sounded like. As he spoke, I remember yawning as his pleasant voice drifted over me, and when I felt my face drifting towards the carpet, I don't even think I was aware I was going to sleep. When I woke up in my bed the next morning, I was confused. When I couldn't find my videotape in my bag before school, I was frantic. I thought about it the whole way to school, and decided that I must have left it at Grandma's house. I had fallen asleep in front of the little TV in the guest room, and so the tape must still be there. I figured it wouldn't be a problem. Grandma was going to come pick me up after school, so I could get it while I was there. When my mom picked me up instead, I was a little bit confused. "Sorry, sweetie, but Grandma's sick, so she can't take you today." Mom had taken off work for the afternoon to pick me up, and I spent the afternoon walking around the house like a junkie. I hadn't been without my tape for the last few years, so being without it now was like torture. I tried to go out and play, but I just couldn't get interested in any of the games. I tried to watch TV, but none of my favorite shows seemed to hold my attention. I just walked around aimlessly, wanting to talk to Mr. Harzo. I'd had a pretty good day that day. He would want to hear about it. He would want to hear about how my team had won at dodgeball, about how my sculpture had been praised by the teacher in art class, about how I'd made a new friend. Not being able to tell him was torture, but I knew I had to stay strong. Grandma would be better tomorrow. I just knew it. It turned out, Grandma was sick that whole week, though. By the end of that week, I was becoming a mess. My parents just saw it as me being a hyperactive kid, but I felt like I was actually going through withdrawals. Sometimes I would just lie on the floor, knees tucked to my chest, and hyperventilate. I remember vividly the feeling of my breath as it rushed out and rasped wetly against my skin. I remember feeling like I might vomit, but being unable to bring up anything. I remember my dad finally taking me and putting me in my room one Saturday, because I had done nothing for 3 hours but stare at the ceiling and shudder. This will sound dramatic to you as you sit in your nice warm house. You'll think I was just overreacting or being a spoiled child who couldn't get their way. Some of you, though, the ones who have loved something self-destructive and lived through it, might understand what it was like. After a week, I asked my mom if maybe we could go visit Grandma. I told my mom I was worried about her and wanted to see her. We were driving back from school, Grandma having been sick all week, and the idea suddenly occurred to me that maybe we could go check on her. Anything at this point to get my fix. Mom had knocked about 20 times when she finally used the spare key to open the lock and head inside. I was in as soon as the gap in the door was big enough. The house looked different, but I hardly noticed. I was charging down the hall to the guest room, Mom calling for my grandmother as she came inside behind me. The door to the little guest room was ajar, and I crashed through it and knelt before the silent altar of that cold little TV on the floor. I pushed the button, but nothing happened. I pushed it again, but still nothing happened. I peeked into the VCR slot and found it empty. Someone had taken my tape. I came hobbling from the room on all fours, probably possessed of that "give us the precious" look old Smeagol showed to Frodo far too often. I heard Mom in the kitchen, still looking for my grandma, but I only had one thing on my mind. Mr. Harzo had to be here somewhere. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped, cocking my head like a dog as I listened. I could hear him. I could hear Mr. Harzo. I could hear the melodic sound of his voice. I could hear the soothing tones that had so often told me that everything would be fine. I had craved that voice for the past 7 days, and now it was so close I could almost taste it. I ambled up the stairs as quiet as I could, pressing my ear to the door of my grandma's room. I could hear him telling her how he understood her woes and commiserated with her sorrow. I shoved the door open, looking into the squalor that had become my grandmother's room. It was filthy. A smell like waste just left to drop where it would assaulted my nose, along with the smell of spoiled food. Grandma was perched on the bed like a gargoyle, her eyes glued to the little TV on the nightstand. The glow from it illuminated her face like a death mask. It had only been a week, but she looked so haggard and so old that it almost scared me to look at her. She jumped when I screamed at her to give me back my tape. She covered the TV, the screen making her eyes shine with lust as the two of us yelled at each other like angry cats. I told her how unfair it was that she could just take things from me and demanded that she give it back. She said it was her tape now and that she would never give it back. In the background, I could also hear the consoling voice of Mr. Harzo as he told us to both find a compromise and that fighting was never the answer. I could hear Mom downstairs, her feet pounding up the hardwood, the sound of us fighting having galvanized her. Mom walked in just as Grandma dealt me a vicious slap across the cheek, rocking my head to the side and sending me sprawling to the floor. I can remember the two of them shouting at each other as easily as I can remember my favorite television show. They never came to blows, but it was very close a few times. Mom wanted to know just what the hell was going on. Grandma kept shrieking that she wanted us out, all the while clutching her murky television set. She said we were not welcome here anymore. She said she never wanted to see us again. She said that she would call the police if we didn't leave immediately. All the while, I could hear Mr. Harzo whispering for her not to do such a thing, for her to work out her problems, to reconcile with her loved ones. Far from making her see reason, hearing her voice only seemed to harden her resolve. Hearing his voice only made me want to bask in the glow of that murky television set all the more. Finally, we left, my mother weeping openly as she dragged me kicking and screaming down the stairs. That was the last time I heard his voice, for 12 years. You would say that after 12 years I might have forgotten about Mr. Harzo. You might think that after 12 years I would have surely moved on with my life. You might assume that I would find other hobbies and interests besides talking to a man that lives inside a VHS tape. You would be wrong. Dead wrong. When it became apparent that I couldn't get the tape back, I started searching. This was the early days of the internet, and I started furiously pursuing information online about similar tapes or similar programs. I didn't find much. There were a handful of people who were clearly just playing around, a few others who were trying to use the tape, and my obvious desire for it, to lure me into something terrible. Neither of these bothered me much, but the others showed me something I didn't want to see. Becky and Steven were two users I spoke to on a forum who believed they had actually come into contact with Mr. Harzo. Both had the kind of conversations with me that smack addicts likely had with each other. They spoke of their time with him lovingly, their words painting a picture of almost worshipful need. Becky said she had spent 10 years with Mr. Harzo before her mother had taken her television and thrown it out. She locked Becky in her room, and Becky had been forced to watch the truck come and take the TV, VHS and all away forever. Steven had a similar story, but his tape had been destroyed in a fire when his house had burned to the ground. That was 2 years ago when I found them, and I had no idea how much they would affect my search. About a year after meeting Steven, he stopped talking altogether. Becky and I assumed that something must have happened to him. He had been teetering lately, rolling in the memories of his time with Mr. Harzo like a dog rolling in a smell it likes, and he had been talking about self-harm a lot. When he didn't sign on for about a week, Becky and I assumed he had finally had enough of dwelling on something that he couldn't have. His last message read, "I'll be with him soon." Becky, on the other hand, saw an opportunity that I never would have foreseen. She had been asking a lot of very loaded questions about where I lived, and more importantly, where my grandmother lived. You see, Grandma was still alive, even after 12 years of living under Mr. Harzo's watchful eye. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and she just sort of lived off her retirement and her slowly deteriorating house. I had walked by a few times, trying to find a way inside while she was away, but she never left. Her groceries were delivered, her mail spilled from her box, and she simply existed inside her crumbling tomb. I saw what Becky was after, and refused to tell her where she could find my tape. Becky, it seems, was more resourceful than I had thought, though. About a week ago, Mom got a call that Grandma had died. The police told us that someone had broken into her house, probably thinking it was abandoned, and found her in her bedroom. The two had fought, and despite her age, Grandma had strangled them to death. Her heart, however, wasn't quite as strong as her hands, and she had died with her fingers pressed into the flesh of the intruder. The intruder had been identified as Rebecca Smythe, a resident of California, who seemed to have driven 800 miles just to break into my grandmother's house. It seemed that my internet friend had finally pinpointed where my grandmother lived, and it had been the end of her. The night after the funeral, I made my move. I broke a window around back, we no longer had a key to the house, and made my way through the unfamiliar squalor. The house was a wreck, junk and garbage piled everywhere, and when I finally found the stairs, I breathed a sigh of relief. They were sagging, the wood groaning as I walked up them, but they were still intact, and my prize was within reach. The TV was on the nightstand, its soft glow illuminating the bed where Grandma had breathed her last. The tape sat in the murky light, like a red invitation or a jolly splash of blood. I've been holding it, feeling its red plastic in my fingers for nearly an hour, as I contemplate whether or not to slide it in. It's not a question of whether I will or not. I have missed Mr. Harzo desperately for the last 12 years, but I wanted to take down this story before I give my life back to him. You may think this is his fault somehow, but I cannot blame him for what has happened. He told my grandma on that long ago day to reconcile with us. He never told me to hurt anyone. He never told me to be unkind to anyone. I think that's why people seek him. When Mr. Harzo speaks, you feel as though he speaks only for you. He accepts you, no matter what, and that kind of power is intoxicating. The TV accepted the tape in just the same way it always had, and now he's smiling at me and welcoming me back as an old friend. I think I'll go speak with my old friend for a while. I think I'll go speak with him for the rest of my life.
It all began with the closing of the Walmart. The Walmart was not the catalyst for the death of Eden, but it was the final death throes of a dying town. Eden had never been what you would call a bustling city. With a population that topped out at about 75,000 in the mid-'80s, the city had undoubtedly seen its heyday. The coal mine had finally panned out in '95. The calculator factory had likewise played out in 2002. The paper mill had lasted a while longer, shutting its doors in 2016. That had been the end of the major industry in Eden. The town had continued, of course. The downtown had done a fair bit of business with the summer people who came through. People from out of town always wanted to pick up a summer house or move to the outskirts to get away from it all. Despite the small spikes, the industry was going, and a lot of the people left when the paper mill closed down. Those who remained were the sort of people who couldn't have been blown out with dynamite. They were oldsters who had been there since they came back from World War II or Vietnam, dyed-in-the-wool capitalists who continued trying to bring industry to the area, and real estate people hoping to get one more dollar out of the dying town. Even some of those latter had to take a firm look at what they were trying to sell when the one seemingly solid job market finally closed up shop. The people of Eden didn't seem to mind, though. Quite the contrary. They were glad the last corporate giant was gone from the area. They talked longingly about getting back to the good old days, and how this would help the waning business on Main Street to thrive again, without big corporations keeping their boot on the throat of the little man. Greg did not agree. For one, he'd been working at the Walmart since he got back from college in 2009. It had been keeping food on the table and the lights on in the dingy apartment that he'd been renting over Abigail's drugs for the better part of a decade, and that's how he liked it. They got the majority of his paychecks, too, and they might as well have been a company store the way Greg looked at it. Even so, it was convenient to have everything within easy reach. The second thing was harder to quantify, but was something that the philosophy teachers at the hoity-toity college he'd dropped out of would have understood all too well. Corporate giant or not, Walmart did not pull out of a thriving town that they could still make money in, as a rule. Watching the semi-trucks with the Walmart logos on them drive for the outskirts of town was like watching the axe-wielding vehicles drive out of the remains of the forest at the end of the Lorax book his mother had read to him as a kid. They had sucked the land dry like a vampire, and now it was time to get out while the getting was good. "Decided where you're going to go work now?" Patty asked, coming up on Greg's side and startling him. I don't know," Greg said morosely. "Abby's been trying to get me to work at the drugstore since Rachel went to college, but she just doesn't pay enough for me to live and eat." "Well, since she's your landlady, maybe she'll give you a little discount if you work for her." Greg laughed at that. The thought of Abigail Worthy giving her own grandmother so much as a nickel off her rent was a laughable prospect. That old biddy would probably haggle with the undertaker when it came time to put her in the ground, and then lodge a complaint for me on the grave when he put too little dirt on top of her coffin. He and Patty chatted for a little bit, making small talk as they watched the town disperse in the now empty parking lot of the supercenter. As the crowd thinned out, Greg stuck his hands in his pockets and told Patty he'd see her around. He walked away from the Walmart, his car having long ago been sold due to lack of use. When you never left town, what good was a car? He'd come back from college a month before his dad died, and had still been there a year after when his mom had told him that she was going to live in Florida with his aunt. He'd moved into the studio apartment over Abigail's, and sold his car the same year. The little hatchback had been great when he'd been putzing around Burbank, but now that everything was in walking distance, it seemed as useless as tits on a boar. He'd gotten about $5,000 for it, and coasted a little until he got the job at Walmart. He'd been working there for the past 10 years, it seemed, stocking shelves and answering questions for customers. You would think that after a decade, management would have cut him a check for his retirement, but Greg had never really paid in. He always said he was gonna every year when the papers came around, but he just never got around to it. It always seemed that when you lived in Eden, you did things tomorrow instead of today. It seemed that when you lived in Eden, you always thought there would be more time.
Stand up straight, Gregory. I'm not paying you to slouch.
Greg sat up and stopped leaning on the glass cabinet that was full of blood testers and diabetes equipment. He'd been working at the drugstore for about 2 months, and he hated every minute of it. To his surprise, Abigail had indeed offered him a discount on rent, but only if he would work for the 14 hours a day that the shop was open. So, from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., closed on Sundays, Greg stood behind the counter and helped old ladies pick out constipation medication or helped old gents find exactly the right size of Depends for their bony asses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid his rent and kept a bit of food on the table. Aside from selling drugstore things, the widow Abigail also sold a little bit of gas station food that was just affordable enough for Greg to avoid malnutrition. He had asked her once about an employee discount, and it was the hardest he had ever seen the old biddy laugh in her life. When the bell rang over the door, Greg looked up and smiled when he saw Patty coming in. Patty had been coming by the drugstore more and more often now that she knew Greg worked there, and she was a nice distraction from the monotony of his job. She had gotten a job down at the Quick Lube on Main Street, and it seemed that her hands were always caked in grease no matter how many times she washed them, her nail beds oily with the sweat of her labor. Abby glowered at the young woman as she came in, but she wasn't about to turn away a customer, even if most of her fare was to come and flirt with their only employee. Greg was not unaware of Patty's flirtation, but she really wasn't his type. Not that Greg had any right to be picky. He liked her all right, she was a good friend, but the thought of laying in bed with her in the way he had lain with some of the girls that he'd gone to college with made his skin crawl. His mother had always said, "Don't take anyone to bed in Eden, 'cause you're likely related to them," and he supposed it was something that had always resonated with him. "Did you get any of that lava soap I ordered?" Patty asked, and Greg reached under the counter and pulled out a brown bag with 3 bars of the funky orange soap inside. "I gave you the buy 2, get 1 free discount," Greg stage whispered, as he cast a suspicious eye over to the widow. "So generous," Patty said, pretending to blush. "Let me make it up to you after work and take you out for a slice of pizza." "Can't," Greg said somberly. "I'm doing inventory tonight. I'll probably be here till after midnight." Patty looked disappointed, but rebounded quickly. "Some other time, then?" "For sure," Greg said, and Patty paid for her soap and left with a little wave over her shoulder. "I don't know why you keep stringing that girl along, Gregory," Abby said as the door closed behind her. "She's the best thing you're likely to find in a dying town like Eden anyway," setting the barb like she always did. "My mom always said never take anyone to bed from Eden," Gregory said as the widow swept her way around the aisles, "because there was a pretty good chance you were related. I'm not sure anyone in town would reproduce if they took your mother's maxim to heart," the widow said solemnly, going into the back to do some other sort of busy work. Greg let slip some of the words that his mother or the widow would have swatted him for if they'd been within earshot. He'd been going to Gino's to get his usual BLT and tomato soup, and the chicken noodle soup that the widow loved so much, for the last 2 months, and it had become a part of his daily routine. Miss Abigail had become fond of the soup since taking to her bed, and she didn't seem to complain as much when she had a bowl of it to hand. She'd been sick for about 2 months, and the doctor seemed to think that she might be for the rest of her life. It wasn't cancer or any of those trendy diseases that usually killed people. Nothing so grand as all that. The widow was suffering from regular old pneumonia, and it seemed like it was there to stay. He had come down to Gino's to get their lunch, only to find a closed sign on the door, and the windows dark and uninviting. "They left town last night," said a familiar voice, and Greg jumped as Patty startled him again. "He was just open yesterday," Greg complained. "The least he could have done was told somebody." Patty laughed at that. "Greg, I think you were the only one in town that didn't know that Gino's was closing. He was serving you, me, and your boss, and that was it. Everyone else is either too broke to eat there or already gone." Greg looked around and seemed to notice that Main Street was looking a little emptier than it usually did. There were more empty businesses than open ones these days, something that had started happening about the time the Walmart closed a year and a half ago. People had expected it to breathe new life into the town, but really it just stopped a lot of summer people from coming at all, and led to a lot of the businessmen that had been planning things in Eden to pull up stakes and leave town too. Greg could see people milling about as they went between shops, but they were like heat illusions as they moved listlessly between the few open places and the restaurants. "How many people do you think are left in town?" he asked Patty on a whim. "I'd say less than 5,000. Daryl's talking about closing up the grease pit and moving it to Perkins with his mother." Greg was shocked. He's operated that garage ever since he came back from the Gulf War. Yeah, and most of the guys who came to him to get their cars worked on or their oils changed were in the Gulf War with him, too. Most of them are dead, left town, or the government took their driver's license, and they can't drive anymore. "What will you do?" Greg asked suddenly, a little bit nervously. He was aware that Patty still had romantic intentions for him, and even though he didn't want to date her, he certainly didn't want to lose what was likely his only friend. "You think Abigail would hire me? I hear she's got a real slouch working for her right now." "Ha ha," Greg said sarcastically. "She might, but certainly not for anything you could pay your rent with. She hasn't been doing too well lately. I think..." He looked uneasily back at Gino's before finding the words to properly express what he was thinking. "I think she might be dying, Patty." "You could be so lucky. They say she came over in the wagons when they first settled this place. The widow Abby is tougher than a boiled owl, and she'll probably outlive all of us." As Greg looked at the empty diner, he certainly hoped so. But in Eden, it often felt like you could shit in one hand and hope in the other, and see which one filled up quicker. "Gregory," the widow said as Greg blundered by on his way to the drugstore. "Come in for a minute. We need to talk." Greg sighed as he turned to walk into her bedroom. This sounded like a "hey, I'm firing you" speech waiting to happen. Greg didn't understand how she could. He was her only employee. He basically operated the store by himself. If she fired him, there was no way she could get out of bed and man the shop by herself. She'd been living with the pneumonia for the last 5 months, and every day that dawned, with Gregory hearing her watery cough, was another day he knew he wouldn't have to call the coroner to come get her. As he pushed the door to her room open, he grabbed one of the masks from beside the door. He wasn't worried about catching anything from her, but what he might pass on to the frail old woman. The whole room smelled of sick, the sweaty aroma of a body too tired to take regular baths, the smell of old food that hadn't been removed, the stench from her bedpan that he would have to take with him when he left, and the wet smell of phlegm that she constantly hacked into a napkin. She breathed heavily, like someone whose lungs are full of lake water, and she smiled sardonically when she saw Greg. "You aren't quite as handsome as the young man I always pictured coming to take care of me after I outlived my husband, but I'm still glad to have you, Gregory." He smiled as he took her hand, holding it gently. "If you're well enough to be sarcastic, then I could really use your help downstairs," he said, enjoying their daily fencing matches. "I'm afraid there won't be anything to open for much longer, son. I just don't have the strength to go down those stairs anymore, and I fear it won't be long before I go to meet my first husband again." She coughed wetly into a napkin as she spoke, and Greg had the good manners not to snatch away his hand. "It sounds an awful lot like you're firing me," Greg said gently. "I suppose I am," she said, "but gently, I hope." "If you're firing me, it might be hard for me to pay you rent, and then I'm not sure how you'd pay the taxes on this place." "That could be difficult," she amended, "but so is coming after a corpse for debt." "How about this?" Greg said. "I'll run the drugstore and manage the accounts so you can keep paying for your medicine if you let me live here and take care of you. Then, when you're gone, you can fire me. How about that?" She laughed, the sound coming out fractured like ice on the cusp of breaking. "You? How could you possibly run the shop and balance the books and order enough product to keep up with the clientele?" Well, I've been doing a pretty good job for the last 9 months, so I figure I'll just keep doing it until... He stopped himself from saying it, realizing he'd become fond of the old woman and the time he'd been taking care of her. Until you get better. She chuckled wetly, sounding like a frog, and looked up at him with her big wet eyes. You're a good man, Gregory Boyle, no matter what your mother always said about you. Keep talking like that, he said, rising up as the sun began to cresp the little window, and I'll make you come downstairs and do some work. Thanks, come again. The old man smiled toothlessly at Patty as she showed him out. She'd agreed to work at the drugstore after her parents had left their house to her. It's only until they sell it, but they said it was nice to have someone looking after it. Greg had agreed that it sounded pretty cool, but he doubted her parents would ever manage to sell the place. The last realtor had left town 6 months ago, and no one new had bought so much as a cup of dirt from Eden since then. There had been some excitement when a company had purchased the old paper mill, but they had all come in with their trucks and stripped what they could from the factory before leaving. As far as Gregory knew, they had never been back. You're pretty good at being a checkout girl, Gregory said, grinning as Patty snorted at him. It's not like it's hard. Most of this stuff sells itself. There was a loud cough from the stairs, and Gregory turned to see Abby making her way slowly down them. She'd been feeling stronger lately, and Gregory had often found her stuck halfway down the stairs. He came to help her, chiding her as she sucked in air soupily. You're gonna kill yourself like that. You're a little stronger, but don't push it. Nonsense, she rasped. This girl needs proper training. With you to teach her, she'll develop all sorts of bad habits. I've got it, Miss Abby. Patty's no slouch. She knows how to do customer service. It was basically all I did in the automotive department of Walmart, Patty added. The widow scoffed. That place wouldn't know customer service if it bit 'em. But she began to cough more as she elaborated, and Greg had to hold her up as it racked her body. Come on, let's get you to the rocker out front. You can greet the customers as they come in and maybe get a little sun. I don't want them to think I've got the Halloween decorations out early. She started to protest, but the sun really had done wonders. The doctors had expected her to succumb to her illness months ago, but it was coming up on 2 years and she was still puttering along. He wrapped her in a blanket and sat her in one of the rocking chairs that dotted the front area. She shivered amidst her layers, the slight breeze reminding Gregory that fall was almost here. He had just gotten her settled when an older woman in a thick shawl approached the shop. Good morning, Miss Laurie. What brings you here today? The old woman gave him a wave. Just came to get the last of my prescriptions to take to Heavenly View. I'm moving at the end of the week, and they want a list for their physician. I'll get it for you, Abby rasped, but Greg told her to sit as he went back inside to get the envelope. Losing Miss Laurie to the nursing home would be quite a blow to their business, but Greg had been expecting it. After her husband died, Miss Laurie became a shut-in. She only left the house to see her doctor or fill her prescription, and this was the first time they'd seen her in weeks. As Greg came back with the envelope, he caught the tail end of their conversation. I'm sure they have room for you, Miss Abby. You could relax with the time you have left and not have to struggle so much. There are people there to help you, and I'm sure Gregory could watch your shop for you. It sounds awfully nice, Abby said softly, but I just don't think I can leave Gregory on his own. He depends so much on my wisdom. Miss Laurie took the envelope, wishing Abby and Gregory the best as she made her way home. The streets were a little less empty today, but the people taking in the sights were nothing but bored locals trying to kill some time. The cars leaving town became fewer and fewer, but that was due in part to the number of residents becoming less and less as well. Greg saw less than a dozen people on a daily basis now, and as the oldsters he'd taken for granted went to either Heavenly View or their heavenly home, their business suffered. Greg watched her go, seeing the potential end of her business as the beginning of the end. Greg flopped onto the rocker in front of the drugstore, his breath coming in deep, grateful lungfuls. All around him, chaos reigned, but its conquest was coming to an end. The fire trucks had taken longer than expected to arrive, Eden's own fire department being little more than 2 volunteers these days. They had both been at home when the fire started, and they had arrived only a little before the trucks from Perkins. It could have been a lot worse. Would have been, in fact, if Greg hadn't smelled the smoke and called for help. As it stood, only 6 buildings had been burned out, their gutted husks looking forlorn in the blinking lights of the fire trucks. Another 4 were damaged, but all 10 had been empty, except for the hardware store. Greg could see Gabriel sobbing quietly on the porch of his father's legacy, the rustic old shop now a burnt cinder that would never rise again. Greg wanted to go to him, especially after all the work he'd done to keep the rest of Main Street from burning, but he was too bone-weary to do much else but sit and be glad that he wasn't crying over a burnt husk too. It had all started at the old ice cream parlor. The building had been abandoned for years, closing up shop right around the same time the Walmart had. That had given the rats that now occupied the space plenty of time to chew on the wires and ruin the electrical box. Greg couldn't prove that that's what had started the fire, but when the smoke woke him up, the peeling white exterior was in full blaze. He'd called the fire department and been redirected to the station in Perkins. As he came out onto the porch, Gabriel was already using one of the big wrenches to pry open the fire hydrant. "Help me!" he gasped through gritted teeth, and as Greg took hold of the wrench, the two had water shooting out in no time. They had just managed to smother the worst of the fire at the parlor when the empty store beside it blazed to life. The next hour became a series of tossing water onto smoldering buildings, only to see the one next to it go up in flames. The old buildings were just so dry, and the summer had been a hot one. The wooden storefronts were little more than kindling to the hungry flames, and even some of the brick fronts began to smoke as their windows shattered from the heat. The trucks showed up, after the 2 men had been joined by a pair from the gas station down the road, Greg having played firefighter for half an hour by that point. The firefighters looked miffed that the 2 had opened a hydrant, but they hooked up anyway, and seemed better equipped at dousing the remains of their once beautiful Main Street. As the trucks rolled away, Greg squinted at the first light of dawn as it crested the broken pavement. He staggered inside, reaching to turn the sign around before realizing the futility. There would be no business today, not with all the smoldering buildings on the street. "Abby, I don't think we're opening up shop today. I'm bone weary, and debris is going to make it impossible to get up the street." He expected her to rasp at him. She was always up early, but he heard nothing. He moved closer to the door, knocking on it, but he still received no answer. He knocked again before pushing inside, seeing her buried beneath her blankets like a small bear. She looked so peaceful, her usual ragged breathing sounding much better today. She usually coughed every 4th breath, but he hadn't heard her cough at all since he'd come in. "Come on, don't be mad. It's been a really long night and I'm dog-tired. There's no way anyone's going to..." As he got close, he noticed that her breathing wasn't clearer like he'd thought. He'd been so tired that he'd overlooked her lack of coughing and wheezing, thinking she might have finally gotten better. It seemed he was right, as was her doctor. He had said that she would keep the pneumonia for the rest of her life. It appeared that now she was cured of it. She neither wheezed nor rasped, coughed or railed. She lay as peaceful as she had when she was a girl. Her breathing wasn't clearer because she was better. Her breathing was clearer because she wasn't breathing. Greg didn't sleep at all that day, and the trucks from Perry had barely passed the county line when he called for an ambulance he knew would arrive much too late. There were only 10 attendees at Abby Worth's funeral. Greg, Patty, and Mayor Daniel were the only 3 from town, the rest being friends from outside Eden. Abby had a simple service. Her plot in Mount Pleasant was arranged the same year her husband had died. She was laid to rest beside him, and when the mayor agreed to follow Greg and Patty back to the apartment, they were flattered to have him join them for dinner. "You know, she left it all to you," the mayor said, making appreciative noises as he ate the meatloaf Patty had made. Greg almost choked as he looked at the man. "How do you know that?" "I'm the only notary and lawyer in town. She came to me after she got sick and told me she was leaving it all to you. She didn't have any other family. Did you know that?" "No, Matt, I guess. You and Patty here are 2 of about 90 residents left in Eden." That took Greg by surprise. How are there so few? Fire last week made the remaining businesses on Main Street rethink staying. They see the unoccupied buildings as a liability. Most of them sold their shops and moved to Perry or DeCroix. The outliers will be gone at the end of the year. None of them have signed leases for the next year, and by January this place may be the only business in town. The 3 sat eating in silence for a few minutes, letting it all sink in. It seemed that Eden, too, was gasping out its last. "I figure the Jim brothers at Jim Petrol will sign up for another year, but I doubt I'll be here to see them close up shop next year. My term ends in May, and whether nepotism elects me mayor again or not, I'm leaving for Montana. My mother's properties sat empty for too many years, and I think I might be ready to retire to the mountains." He excused himself after that, thanking Patty for the meatloaf as he left the 2 of them in the little apartment. The 2 ate in silence, their grief palpable as they quietly mourned a woman they had both grown close to. "Did I tell you?" Patty finally said, looking up from her laborious task of herding her green beans into a corner. "Someone finally bought Mom and Dad's old house." "Oh?" Greg asked, his mind trying to punch through the film of grief to realize what this meant. Who's the lucky owner?" "State Road Department," she said, managing a small, painful smile. "They bought most of the houses in that area. They're starting work on a highway project that will cut the time from Washington to California by hours. It's bad news for Perry. It'll cut a lot of the little roads out of the equation and give them a straight shot to the coast." What she didn't say was this would also be a huge detriment to Eden, but that hardly seemed to matter. Where will you go?" Greg asked, his food forgotten at the prospect of being one less in a town of ghosts. "I don't know," she said. She was standing at the sink, and Greg could see her in profile. She looked lovely in mourning, a woman that any man would have been lucky to have the love of. She was dependable, she was hard-working, she was kind, and, worst of all, she seemed to put her own happiness aside for Greg. He knew she would give him that love, that she would stay with him in this tiny apartment if he asked her to, but he also knew that it would be selfish to ask. In the movies, Greg would ask her to stay, and they would embrace and kiss, and soon their children would be running through the streets as they watched happily from rockers on the front porch. She seemed to be waiting for just that, but Greg couldn't give it to her. She deserved more than Greg's empty companionship. Patty deserved something more than Greg's fumbling platonic feelings. She told him good night a few minutes later, taking her Pyrex dish and leaving through the familiar stairs. Even in his grief, now elevated by the loss of his friend, Greg wasn't blind to the sobs she tried to muffle. Greg came awake like a hibernating bear, the loud banging on the door enough to wake the dead. Someone was really walloping it, too, slamming their fist against it hard enough to rattle the glass, and Greg came tentatively out of bed. He was wearing only a shirt and jockey shorts, his mid-30s belly hanging over the waistband as he crept from the bedroom and into the living room. He reached for the fire poker as he came, afraid that the empty town might have attracted teenagers bent on helling. They would have seen the lights in the bathroom upstairs and decided to shake the cages a little, and Greg wished he'd thought to grab his shotgun before leaving the bedroom. He came down the stairs in a slow, jerky walk, the pounding not stopping in the least bit. Whoever it was calling his name, too, which was a little off-putting. Greg couldn't imagine anyone he knew in this town being out so late and banging on his door, but he quickened his pace a little, fearing someone was in trouble. Maybe Patty was hurt. Maybe there'd been another fire. Maybe it was something even worse. He'd been right about that, it seemed, and as the door came open, he found Patty leaning against the frame, grinning at him drunkenly. "There you are, Gregory," she trumpeted, stumbling into him as she slurred an apology. "Are you all right?" Greg asked, trying not to draw attention to her current state, but finding it very difficult. "Right with Eversharp," she said, her hands wrapping around him as she tried to pull him into her arms. "What's gotten into you, Patty?" Greg asked, though it was pretty clear what had gotten into her. As if in response, Patty pressed her lips against his, silencing his upcoming protests. Her tongue was warm and wet as it tried to invade his mouth, and Greg struggled as he tried to push her away. His skin was covered in goosebumps, and he was shuddering as she leaned closer to him. He could taste the alcohol on her breath, and it was making him gag. He didn't know what she'd been drinking, but it was stronger than anything he was familiar with. When she finally pulled away from him, her eyes were streaming tears, and they looked hurt and confused. "Why won't you kiss me back?" she wailed, as she stumbled backwards and bumped into the doorframe. Greg searched for the words, but he just couldn't find them. I just don't think of you that way," he finally blurted out. She sobbed, her eyes gushing as she looked at him blearily. She was drunk and confused, and clearly this had made more sense before she'd come to his home in the middle of the night. Now her hopes were falling to pieces, and she was left with nothing but the understanding that she was alone. He'd been honest with her, but that had hardly cut the sting. "Why won't you love me?" she bawled, her eyes accusatory even as they gushed tears. "I stayed in this corpse of a town for you, Greg. I worked at a place that barely paid for my groceries and lied to my parents when they wanted nothing but to send me back to college. And for what? I love you, Greg. I've loved you since we were kids. Why won't you love me back?" When he gripped her shoulder, it sobered her a little, and he saw the embarrassment starting to creep into her eyes. "I do love you, Patty. I love you too much to let you settle for someone who doesn't love you the same way you love them. You deserve someone who will love you as deeply as you love me, and I can't do that. Go. Let your parents send you to college. Live the life you deserve. Find someone who will care for you the way you care for me." It was morning before she sobered up enough to leave, and the two had a long talk. Patty cried a lot, Greg finding his eyes too dry for tears. She didn't sway as she left, the alcohol having been burned away by her despair. Greg watched her go, and went to bed as the sun filled the apartment with light. Tomorrow would be Sunday, the only day Abby let them close the store. He'd take tomorrow to mourn, and then open the store on Monday. It seemed appropriate somehow to take a day for himself before getting back to the only thing he was good at. Greg sat on the front porch of Abby's drugs, the snow coming down as it coated the cracked and pitted streets of Eden. It had been 20 years since the widow Abby Worth had passed, and he was still living in Eden, if you could call it living. His hair was now the silver of falling snow, his eyes not as good as they had been, and his legs shook a little when he walked. That didn't stop him from tending the garden that he'd begun growing on 5th Street, or the other on 6th Street, that had borne corn every year since Patty had left. He had a letter from her somewhere upstairs, in the drawer where he kept his prized possessions. She had sent a few others, a wedding invitation, a birth announcement, and a few Christmas cards, but he hadn't received anything from her in 4 years. She would be old too now, and Greg wondered if she might have died. He coughed as he watched the snow, bending double into the rocker as he spat phlegm into it. It sounded as bad as the widow's had, and he didn't need a doctor to tell him that he was dying. It had started as a cough, just a dry thing that was better some days than others, but it had grown wet and rough, and now his breathing was soupy and worrisome. He supposed it would probably kill him, and he found that the idea didn't bother him all that much. He could feel the cold weight of the gold key he wore around his neck, and he smiled as he thought of the day Mayor Daniel had come to say goodbye. He had lasted longer in the town than he'd thought, outlasting the Jim brothers by a whole month. Their contract with Exxon had been canceled when they couldn't pay their gas bill, and without the gas, they had packed up shop and headed to parts unknown. By then, there had been about 60 people on the outskirts, and no one in the town proper. Days would go by between people sightings, but there were still a few who came to the drugstore. It wasn't until the outlying farms and lands began being annexed by the surrounding towns that Mayor Daniels had decided to leave. Greg had looked up when the bell rang and nodded when he saw Daniels walk in. "Something ailing you, Mayor?" he asked, but the graying man had shaken his head. Not the mayor anymore. I'm heading out, I think. I'm not sure where, but I think Eden is all but played out." He tossed the key to Greg then, the one that would open most any door or any building or storefront that was still good. The mayor's office, the sheriff's office, anything else the town deemed the mayor worthy of guarding. "Guess now you're the mayor, the last mayor of Eden. Wear the title with pride. If you leave, be sure to pass the key to whoever's still here." Greg had never gotten a letter from him, but the key had come in handy when it came to planting and keeping the power on. It also got him a small stipend from the state, which he used to keep the lights on Main Street burning, and some food in his fridge to keep him from starving. Greg hadn't seen anyone wander through Eden in years, save for a few cars that got lost on their way somewhere else. Sometimes ghost hunters or the curious came to visit, and Greg told them what town history he remembered as he tried to ignore their petty theft. They never took much. Anything worth anything was locked away behind one of those doors that his key opened. He supposed they would have it after he was gone, if they didn't mind a little grave robbing or corpse rifling. He coughed then, and when he took his hand away, his palms had red on them. As he looked down Main Street, he could see the collapsed remains of the old Walmart as it hunkered like a tired dog. He remembered standing outside it as he watched the trucks roll away, and it seemed like 1,000,000 years had passed since then. People called Eden a ghost town, and they weren't wrong. As Greg looked up and down the street, he imagined all the ghosts who must reside here. He watched a gaggle of old ladies wandering up the road towards the Baptist church that had burned to the ground 3 years ago during a lightning storm. He saw some school kids laughing up the road as they headed for the ice cream parlor that had started the fire all those years ago. He saw 4th of July parades, Christmas tree lightings in the square, summer days that ended with the sound of cicadas, scarecrow contests that the mayor had resided over dutifully. Greg thought he saw Patty and Abby waiting for him, and as the rise and fall of his chest slowed, he wondered if he might love her in the hereafter, as he never could in life. As he watched the snow come down around him, and the swish of his chair became slower and slower, he supposed he would find out.